This is the Rebel HR Podcast, the podcast about all things innovation in the people space. I'm Kyle Rode. Let's start the show. All right. Welcome back, HR Rebels. Really excited for the conversation today. We are going to have a fun one here. With us, we have Tim Sackett. He is the CEO of HRU Tech, recognized as an influencer and creator of one of the top 10 global HR influencers. And we're going to be talking about all sorts of different things today. Tim, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, really excited to have you here. And before I hit record, I had mentioned, I've been following you on LinkedIn for a couple of years now, and just appreciate all the content you put out there. And we're really excited to have you on to share some of your work and perspective with our listeners today. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I love being on podcasts and talking, because I think it reaches like a different audience. It doesn't. Again, people are on LinkedIn, people are on, the Twitter, or can't call it Twitter anymore, X, whatever, IG. I'm not on Snap. Like, I don't know. It's at a point you go, come on, like, where are we at? I'm also not on, like, I'm on TikTok, but I'm one of the guys that just lurks on TikTok. I don't like do TikToks. Like, I don't.
Yeah, we actually just talked about this with a past guest. Like, I actually have a TikTok page for the podcast, but it's just like snippets of the podcast.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I am not, like doing like an HR Rebel dance, like show tune style or something. Like, it would be,
exactly.
It would just be gratuitous.
I get a lot. I get so many people saying, oh my God, you should have one, and you should just go out there and you should just rip on like the tech space and vendors. And I'm like, that's not who I am. And I would never do that.
Yeah. That would be interesting though. There are a couple, I think there's a couple HR folks out there that they're like the, like the anti-HR, which is fine.
If that's your stick, man, do it. Like, this is not me. I love our space too much to kind of like, rip on people. So.
Yeah. And at a certain point, it's like when you're actually in the trenches and you're a practitioner and you're trying to like hire people, retain people and stuff like that, you don't necessarily want to be the person out there, being super cranky about the work you're doing. Right.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Well, really excited again to jump into it here. And I want to start off the conversation by talking a little bit about the work that you do as the CEO of HRU Tech. And, obviously focused on technology, really focused on the HR space. I'm curious to maybe start off with a question about what type of technology in your space right now are you the most excited about coming down the pipeline here for HR?
A lot of what I do is talent acquisition technology and recruiting technology. I'm also like performance technology, I think, is one of those things that we haven't really figured out yet, which again, we can dig into. But for me, the one that stands out above everything is a company called Paradox.ai right now, which is a high volume hourly hiring technology based on conversational AI, blah, 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 like this, put people to sleep here. But the reality is it's just a super simple, easy, lightweight thing. If you think about most hourly people when they apply to a job, in fact, there was a giant like global manufacturer that I was working with, and we started to go through their process. It was literally 27 screens that an hourly worker had to go through to finish the application. And it's just, wow. What are you thinking to, and what you would hope for is to get, like maybe it would take 90 seconds, 3 minutes. Like, that's the holy grail. Some people are like, hey, we got it down to 7 minutes. Great. It's better than, 27 clicks. And, and the crazy part is like, they had to people like, fill out an entire application that like on the screen. And then an actual physical application came up like a PDF that they had to fill in. They asked for the same stuff. And I'm just like, what are you? And they're like, well, and this is just classic HR. It was like, well, we need the application. And you're like, no, you asked them for the application stuff. You don't have to have a physical application. It's so silly, some of the things we do. I love and that Paradox isn't the only one. There's a bunch of the high volume hourly conversational AI companies out there. They just happen to be the one that, kind of created the space, and they're probably having the most success. And again, they just are game changing. I was working with, a really large enterprise employer. And this is just like, I think what every technology company would want. The guy goes, it just works. Like, and how often do we now? And I'm like, that should just be their tagline. It just works,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's one of those areas. I think AI is really fascinating. I think there's a lot of headlines right now. I've kind of dabbled in like the Chat GPT, like
Yeah.
almost like a copywriter, right? Like
Mhm.
it can like give you, if you start with a blank piece of paper, it can give you a kind of a directional place to go. It's not perfect, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I've got to believe that some of these AI tools and some of these technology tools, um, you know, they're they're really about kind of saving time in areas where you can define parameters and have some clear black and white things articulated,
Mhm.
and then eventually it has to get handed off to some sort of a human to do some of the assessment. Is that what you're seeing in this space? Is that really where you see this going, at least in the near future?
Yeah, I mean, it's a higher level of automation, and I think we've been automating in HR and TA forever, right? So I think this is
Right.
just that next level. Most of this stuff is going to be built into the systems and processes we use. It'll be invisible to us. I do hear, like, you'll have someone raise their hand. They'll go, "But Tim, I read this Wall Street Journal article that AI is racist," and I'm like, "Well, you don't understand. AI can't be racist." Now, it can learn your racist behaviors or your biases, and then it will reflect those and mirror those back to you. Um, I guess, and I always tell people, like, that was kind of like machine learning 1.0, and we're so far beyond that now that, we have built-in audits and parameters and bumpers and things to kind of help to ensure that AI isn't being biased or generous or anything like that. I'm way less concerned with my AI being biased than I am with Jim, the hiring manager, right? I can't
Sure.
control Jim. I can control my technology.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Believe me, I've had that dialogue with a number of people as we've talked about this, like the risk of being an exclusive club of AI, and I think inherently there's probably some level of bias in it because it is learning from human behavior or human responses and reactions. But that's an interesting tangent, that to think about it in the fact that, you know, it's better than the hiring manager, and at least you have some control over it, right?
Well,
Um,
and now, yeah, you have the audit. Like, I think, again, originally when they turned on machine learning, it was like, let's say I'm the hiring manager, right? And I'm just like, oh, I just love hiring white dudes. The machine was learning that I like to hire white dudes. And so it was giving me more white dudes, right? And so that it was going, hey, the machine's biased. And you're like, well, not really. It's just learning what you want. It's giving you more. I think now, you can build in, like, this is just, all the AI is a software, right? So you can code in to say, hey, by the way, if your top of funnel, candidates coming in, let's say, is a 50-50 male female ratio, we want to ensure that as we go through and screen and assess and all these things, we want to see red flags when that ratio goes upside down, right? Or turns sideways or something like that, right? So there, you can build in all this stuff and then have real time metrics that goes, hey, oh, by the way, it's actually turning, but it's turning when it hits to the interview, right? So again, the real person stepped in and this happened. I was on a panel a few months ago. One of the guys that was on the panel was an AI professor from Stanford, and he might have been 30 years old, right? This is the kind of, these are the AI professors of today, is super young people. And he said, raise your hand if you think, AI can be biased. And most of the room was HR people raised their hand. He goes, well, let me share something. He goes, anytime you add AI into a process, you reduce bias. Anytime you add human into a process, you increase bias. And it was just that kind of like, we've been thinking about this all wrong.
We'll be back after a quick break.
And so used to having everything in front of them right away that we forget that innovation just takes time. I myself, I get frustrated too. Why? And this is being one of my best friends is, hey, I talk to you all the time. Hey, man, I'm frustrated in the fact that I can't seem to just get there in the next day. But that's just not how these things work, right? Innovation needs to be planned out. It needs to be very methodical. And then when it finally hits, that's when it seems like to everyone else that it sort of just came out of nowhere. But to you, you know the amount of dedication that it took over that time.
Absolutely. I think it's fascinating where this is going to go. I do think, to that point, one of the benefits of AI is you can measure the output,
Yeah.
right? You can measure the input,
Yeah.
the output. So if there is a failure in your system somewhere, and it happens to be with the human screening process, the infamous, well, they're just not a quote fit, right? And that whatever that means. Versus having some sort of objective screening methodology, right? That's
Yeah.
where it gets really interesting.
I think the hardest part for all of us is going to be, how do we keep this stuff in the middle of the road, right? We tend to like right ditch, left ditch on a lot of stuff. Like you go one way all the way too far, and then you course correct and you go the other way. And to me, I'm always like, hey, yeah, I love part of like the skills conversation right now. We talk about skills-based hiring, blah, blah, blah. And it's so much I just want to throw up because it's all marketing kind of stuff. But I'm like, that's great, right? I understand the premise of why we want to hire skills. But at the end of the day, we're also hiring humans, right? We're hiring people that have experiences, that have education, that have, I try to tell people, if I'm General Motors and I need to hire, and we're going from combustion engine to electrical engine, and I need to hire a bunch of electrical engineers, of course, I want skills. I'm looking for embedded software, blah, blah, blah. Also, if I have two people that the skills are basically the same, one worked at Tesla for 5 years and one didn't, I probably that experience at Tesla is very valuable. I want that, right?
Right.
And so we can't give up on experience and education and all of these things. And that's where I see us, like, we have so many people now going, yeah, we don't even care about experience or education. We only hire skills. And I'm like, good luck with that. Have fun.
I love that. The analogy, the right ditch, left ditch, like either way, if you end up in the ditch, it's a bad thing, right? Like,
yes. Yeah.
I don't care which ditch.
Correct.
Yeah, it's and I think that's one of the things that's fascinating about about this world, about technology in general, is there's so much there's so much advancement. And I actually I think one of the more interesting things about AI is the fact that AI is actually going to help advance tech that much more, because it helps with programming, right? Because it can actually build more tech more efficiently than a human being can, once it figures out what you're trying to build and code and all that. And so I think this could be the area of AI that's maybe more important than anything else. And quite frankly, if any of us in HR are fighting against this and saying we can't have this, then okay, best of luck to you. But this is going to be here for the rest of your career. So,
oh God, yeah.
Whether you utilize it or not, it's up to you. But it exists.
I think HR pros need to kind of focus not on what AI will take away from HR, from their job, or from their daily activities, but what do you do that's uniquely human that AI couldn't take away, right? What those relationships with candidates, with employees, with all those, like, kind of there's a lot of stuff that makes us uniquely human that AI can't replace. And if you focus there, that's going to be the future of HR, the future of TA, future of all that we do. So it's like this concept of, becoming a 10x HR pro or 10x recruiter or whatever. How are you leveraging this technology to be that much better of a person?
Absolutely. Yeah. I very well said. I couldn't agree more, and I think that the HR professionals that can identify where humanity needs to be present in the workplace, in the culture, in their everyday lives, and where it maybe doesn't. There's especially, like, I think a lot of the like solutions that are, quite frankly, I'll call just busy work, right? Like it's you've got these protocols that you follow, and the 17 different steps, and by the end of it, you're like, why the hell did I do step 14 through 16? Like this is a complete waste of time. I don't need to do this. It's like the application, answer.
Yeah.
Why do they have to do an application? Well, because I said so. Like that's the honest answer. It's like,
you don't
even
27 years ago, our legal team said we had to have a signed application. You're like, okay, I can. I can have the computer will fill all that stuff out. When the person comes to sign their paperwork, we'll have them sign it, or we'll do an electronic signature. We'll figure it out, right? I don't need to have them do it physically.
Yeah.
It's one of those crazy things that just kind of doesn't make sense to us anymore, from that standpoint.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like I remember there was there's a question on one of the certification tests I had to take. We'll keep it nameless just in case one of them wants to sponsor the podcast in some in the near future. But it was like what, why do you have to have it? Like the premise of the question was, why do you have to have a signed application with every candidate? Like the assumption in the question was you have to, right? And the question was, why do you have to? And this is like in every, many HR professionals take these tests. So that's like the honest answer, right? It's like, because we assume that we have to, because we've always been told.
Letter D was like CYA, and you're like, bing.
That's exactly. Because some lawyer somewhere at some point said, hey, because you didn't have this, we're going to go sue the company. And, some headline somewhere.
Hey, Kyle, by the way, I understand like the tactical work of HR and how people get addicted to the tactical work of HR. I'm one of those guys who I love to mow my yard. And people go, really? Like, oh my God, why? And I said, because there's so much in our life that you begin in the day and then you just come back the next day or the next week or the next month and it's never completed. But I can go mow my yard and at the end, look at the straight lines and it's completed. And I'm like, I accomplished that, right? It's fresh smelled grass, like the whole thing. And people think I'm insane, but it's like, no, I can start that. I can complete that. And it looks amazing. And that's tactical work in HR. That's tactical work in recruiting. We get frustrated with like our HR peers who like love that. And I go, God, I totally get it. I totally understand why they love it. But if that's what you think your job's going to be in the future, you're not going to have a job. Like it's just going to be gone.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I totally, by the way, I totally get it. Although I don't do the mowing, because there's a high school kid that, likes to do it for me, and I'm perfectly happy with it. But I used to work in retail, and I used to feel the same way about being a cashier. Like there's something beautiful about like through the midst of our day, I don't have to go like deal with HR stuff. I can just go like check somebody out at the cash register, and it's like, it's like I can start something and I can finish something. It's like, oh, that felt great. That was really nice. I don't have to.
No, I mean, we discount that. We discount that, right?
It's kind of nice. It's kind of nice. But I do think it's, that is where I think the individuals that embrace it, it's an accelerator, right? Like this is just the more of that stuff that you systemize and automate, the more of the other stuff that you can focus on. And I actually think like, so I have a lot of people on my team that are like hyper diligent, like super high attention to detail. They love to start. They love to finish. Like they like awesome tacticians. I would argue like their job is to go out and make sure everything's just running correctly, right? Like it's more of a, hey, is the system working, as opposed to, hey, I actually have to go like check these boxes on this best practice. So I think that skill set's still there, but it's a little bit of a different version, right?
Yeah.
So it'll be fascinating to see where we end up. And I think, the other thing that I think is fascinating is the fact that I think this is, especially in talent acquisition, just because I think it's probably the most advanced, where we're seeing the most advancements, probably because there's so much noise in talent acquisition, just because of the labor shortage and all this stuff right now. Like, it's squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? But I think it's really going to change the face of talent acquisition. And I think if you look at talent acquisition on kind of on the macro level, it's really being heavily disrupted right now. And so I'm curious, because this is your wheelhouse. This is where you spend a lot of your space. How do you foresee that disruption kind of reshaping the talent acquisition industry as a whole?
That's super interesting, because I think we take a look at corporate talent acquisition versus kind of agency RPO, like all these kind of aspects of how we fill positions. And I was just at a conference last week, and we had so many people talking about like, oh my gosh, like we're in this really kind of downturn in TA. And they were talking about all the tech side of like recruiters losing their job, recruiting leaders. But like you and I both know, like we do a ton of like manufacturing work. And if you're on that side of the world, you can't find enough people. There's a labor shortage, and it just
Tell
continues
me
to get
about it.
worse. And then demographics continue to play against us for the next foreseeable future. And so it was weird that we're having people. There was always people like, that are in our space that was like, oh my gosh, it's doom and gloom. And I'm looking at them going, that's not the way most of the world feels right now. You guys are in this very, they were in this all startup space, right? Where money was free and they're getting hundreds of millions of dollars for an idea,
Yeah.
and then they had to burn through this cash and they were overhired. I think Twitter, when Elon came in, they had Twitter's TA team had 1,200 people in it. That's one TA person for every 8 employees. That's not that is not sustainable, right?
No, that sounds great. By the way, that'd be so nice.
So they lay off 1,000, and people think, oh my gosh, it's never going to run. It's never going to do that. They're just fine. They're fine.
Sure.
They didn't need 1,200 people. I always question, like, what were these people doing? Like, really? Like, they had, like, what was your job?
TikTok.
Yes, probably a lot. They probably had an entire TA TikTok team, I'm sure. Burning through cash left and right.
Sure.
So but yeah, I do think, like, when we take a look at corporate TA, I think is going to be the one that's going to get disrupted the most. And I say this knowing that there's great corporate TA people out there, but we still have, I bet 90% of the corporate TA world is posting a job and waiting for somebody to apply. Now, again, that's a very broad stroke. And I'm not saying that because I work on the staffing or agency world, because I've worked on both sides and I've seen it happen, and I see it continue to happen with a lot of consulting work I do. And if that's what you do, if you post a job and you wait for somebody to apply, the company does not need you. The technology will do that 24/7, 365 better than you.
Right.
And so we have to get into and say, okay, well, then the future of corporate TA becomes really going out and saying, hey, in our marketplace, who is the best talent? And then what are the relationships we have, so that when a hiring manager comes to us and says, hey, by the way, I need another quality inspector, or I need a whatever, that you go, oh my gosh, I've been talking with Jill over here. I'm going to now engage her and say, hey, we're ready. We want you to come in, and we know you're better talent, right? Instead of going, well, let's recreate the wheel and start from ground zero every single time we have an opening. Like, that's just, I don't need that. The AI will do that better than I can.
Right. Yeah, it's a great point. And I think, the reality is, especially when you get into like these really critical positions where there be really specialized skill set, where you actually do need experience and skills and like education so that you can actually do the work, not just like have a great mindset.
Well, we have this like misnomer that we only hire the best talent. Every CEO that I talk with would go, we only hire the best talent. Here's what they actually hire. They actually hire the best talent that's available at the time that the position was filled and that applied to the job, which actually could be the worst talent available in the market. But they say we only hire. What they're hiring is, they go, basically what they're saying is like, Tim, we only hire the tallest of the 7 dwarfs. Like, that's what they're saying.
Right.
It's like, still hiring a dwarf. And I'm saying that's a metaphor for not hiring like the best talent. But like constantly, like I hear that. And then I know on their TA side, or I know on the HR side what's actually happening. And I'm like, oh gosh. But here's the sad part is, most of those CEOs, they truly believe that their teams are out there trying to find the best talent. They don't realize that we're just filtering through whatever talent actually applied to our job, right? That has no correlation to actually being better,
Right. And that's where I do think what's really fascinating, and I think really interesting in the future, is the kind of the cultivated talent networks that are out there. And a lot of times you do see that on a non-corporate team, where you've got people who are actively going after passive candidates and building kind of a community and a network. And that's where you can see like social media, AI, some of these technological platforms that help like connect talent with jobs that are maybe content, but open-minded. And that's where I've seen a lot of the success is those like these multi-year relationships where you talk to somebody and you keep that resume, and then you're like, 3 years later, you're like, oh, we just did an org restructure. I talked to this individual 3 years ago. At the time, we didn't have exactly what they were looking for. They want a general manager status. You know what? Here it is right here. Let's get them on the phone, and that's where it matters. And honestly, like, I do think that's the exception versus the rule. And it all comes
Yeah.
down to, like, having a tool to do that, because, like, you know, it's very rare that I actually remember those people, right? Like I have
Oh, for sure.
a
Yeah.
file full of resumes of people that are great, but it's like,
No, yeah.
what was that person's name again? Oh shit, I don't remember. I don't know.
No,
It's
and in
years ago.
the next 24 months, there's going to be technology on the market where you'll literally speak to your computer. In fact, I just demoed one this morning that it was just like, hey, I want to do a search, and instead of typing it in, you're just basically telling it basically a conversation that you just had with the hiring manager. Like, hey, we're ABC, we're this, we need this, blah, blah, blah. And it was like, it was taking in all of this, and then bam, it would give you back out like a perfect job ad posting based on all of that you could adjust and change. But it was like, oh, wow. So now imagine going, oh my gosh, hey, I talked to a female, like maybe a couple of years ago. They worked at Tesla. They were an electrical engineer. And all of a sudden, as you're speaking, it's bringing
Yeah.
names. You're like, oh, that's the person right there. It's like,
Yeah,
oh my
that
God,
one.
this
Yeah,
is great.
the one with the cat.
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
if you got, I mean, like, I need that. Like, it's like, oh, is that one person that was coaching their kids'
Yeah.
softball team? And I have, I am at a point now where I actually do use digital notes. I actually don't have the scribbles on
Yeah.
the piece of paper. So, I'm at least kind of there. But
I always, I
it'd be
always tell people like
very helpful.
in like AI, imagine having a personal assistant, but that personal assistant actually knew every single thing. And then I go, and
Right.
now imagine that personal assistant in every aspect of your life, not just professionally, but personally. Like you wake up in the morning and the coffee you can smell is already brewed because they know and by the way, they had ordered it, and it got delivered. Like there's not
Right.
one aspect of your life that this person or this thing or doesn't, like I say person, doesn't know about you that can help. Like,
Right.
and I even say this on the HR side, imagine in the employee experience, like right now, somebody calls in and says, hey, how much PTO do I have? We pull up the HCM. We're like, oh gosh, Tim, you have 56 hours. You're like, okay, great. And we mark that as a success. Like, oh my gosh, we
Yeah.
got a question. We answered it. Like today was a good day. Didn't even have to use my AK. And but now imagine, why does somebody call and ask for PTO? Well, they could actually want to go on vacation, or maybe they need to use some time to take care of themselves or a loved one, or maybe they're actually looking to cash out because they have another job. Like there's always reasons, right? That AI could start going, hey, by the way, prompt, Tim with this question, like, oh, are you going on vacation? Like, oh yeah, I'm going to Florida. And the AI would know, oh, Tim has 2 dogs. And like, so now in HR, you could go, oh, were you able to find someone to watch your dogs? We have some services, right? Or did you get your
Right.
hotel at a Marriott because we get 20% off corporate discount? Like you could actually like really engage and up that employee experience versus going 56. You have 56 hours.
56 thumbs up.
That's it. Click,
Thank you. Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, it really, I think, as we take a look at potentially of what that could be is just, it's only your mind can like come up with like the, how that ends,
Yeah, that's like, it's that would be ideal state. It's the like the leading indicator of the employee experience. Like, hey, can we actually give somebody a cultivated, employee experience, right? Like, I mean, we're going through this right now, right? It's the benefits renewal time
Mhm.
for the renewal at the beginning of the year, and it's like, well, we got all these great programs, we're doing all these wonderful things. And the reality is, you could have the best program in the world, but if nobody really knows how to use it or doesn't get connected to it when they actually need it, or gets, calls the wrong 800 number when they actually need a different one, and now it's a bad experience and you've got no control, right? If there's a tool
Yep.
that can help out with this, it's like, why wouldn't we use this, right? If this makes people happier, more engaged, and helps the tools that we're like blood, sweat, and tears pouring over to get everything in this thing correct and accurate and trying to make everything, implemented well, then why wouldn't we use a tool to make sure that people can actually use it correctly, right? So it's
Yeah.
stuff like that. I totally
If you-
agree.
If you have 1,000 employees, it doesn't matter how many whatever number of employees you have, there's going to be a time when you're going to have 500 employees and they're going to have 500 different benefit programs because each
Sure.
one is going to be specifically tailored to them based on AI. And it's not something we have to actually build. It's going to be built, right? I try to tell people, imagine like a job description going up right now, maintenance supervisor. Now imagine a candidate coming but the job description in the moment changes specifically for that candidate. I mean, like that stuff will
Right.
happen, you
Right.
know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, there's just so many use cases there, right? Like you can generate an interview guide, ask specific questions so that you can get objective responses based upon someone's background and skills, right? That
Yeah.
would take you 10 years to cultivate and figure out based upon, succeeding and failing, right?
Yeah.
As a recruiter. And yeah, I think there's just, it's going to be fascinating to see where this goes. I think the long story short though is, we've got to be open-minded. We've got to be able to embrace it. And I strongly believe the organizations that do, they're just going to be more nimble. They're going to move more quickly. Speed wins in this in this field, especially in talent acquisition. And so, if you can figure out how to stay focused on being more nimble, I think it's going to benefit you and your organization long term. So
yeah, the number one question I get asked like over the last really since kind of GPT launched is people always asking like how they can get involved or how do they stay in front of it and I'm always just like, talk to your current like tech providers, understand what their roadmap looks like. And if they don't have AI in their roadmap and they're kind of acting like they're anti-AI, start looking for other vendors,
Sure.
Yeah. Don't sign that next contract. There's going to be a problem, right? You're going to be left behind by your competition.
Yeah, I agree. I think you got to get some forward thinking partners, 100%.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
So speaking of, we're really like literally just scratching the surface here, but I want to shift here into the Rebel HR Flash Round because I'm fascinated to hear your responses as someone who's very influential in the space. So first question of the Rebel HR Flash Round: where does HR need to rebel?
Performance. If I talk to, every time I talk to an executive team, the one thing that they still can't figure out, well, they would say talent, right? And that's just, we're all trying to figure that out. And part of that is it's not something that's necessarily a TA HR problem. I mean, it is because we've owned that problem, but we have a demographic issue that's bigger in the US, right? So that's kind of just a bigger overall problem that none of us can solve, but we all have to figure out how to solve it. To me, it's performance. It's flat out. When we talk about return to work and hybrid and remote and all this crap, actually, your executives don't care. They do not care. All they care about is the performance is there. And when they start talking about return to work, the reason they're talking about it is because performance isn't where they need it to be. And so it's one of those things where it's like, hey, if the company was actually performing better year over year, you would never have an executive go, hey, I think we need people to come back and sit in a queue. Like they would never say that.
Right.
But without knowing and that without us giving them any levers to pull, they go back to what they know, which is asses in seats. I see you there, so you must be working, which we know that's true either, right? But that's why there's this giant pull back to the office, and people think, oh no, it's a commercial real estate thing, it's a whatever. Your company would gladly pay for an empty office building for a 25% increase year over year. Like they would have no issue at all of paying for an empty office building.
Right.
This is not a real estate question. This is a flat out performance question. So I think if I'm running HR for a company, I'm actually calling myself the chief performance officer and I'm owning performance for the entire organization. And I'm going to ramp it up to a level where low performers are no longer welcome to work here. It's just the way it's going to be. And I'm going to drive high performance.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I just had a similar conversation with my CEO literally last week. And it was, we're doing all the right things, right? And as a head of HR, you generally have a playbook and you have to determine how best to execute the playbook. But the push was not necessarily to execute the HR playbook, right? The push was to execute the organizational playbook. How do we grow? How do we do it profitably? How do we perform? How do we do it through people? Because that's really, at the end of the day, that's what we're here to do, right? So I couldn't agree more. So some anecdotal evidence for you there.
Yeah. No, I love that.
All right. Question number 2. Who should we be listening to?
I get asked this a lot. People want to know like who I'm reading because I blog a lot in the space or who, what podcast. I'm a nerd for data. So I love economists. And so like Marginal Revolution, Tyler Cowen, I tend to listen and read everything outside of our space. I do a lot of MarTech, marketing technology type reading. Again, just knowing that in the talent acquisition space, we tend to trail marketing by about 5 years, right? So whatever they're doing right today, this is probably going to be standard with what we'll be doing in TA 5 years from now.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is the same exact thing, right? It's just,
Yeah.
instead of, selling a product, you're selling your organization to a consumer, i.e. potential employee, right?
Yeah.
So yeah,
I'm like going out next week and I'm like speaking at a construction conference, and there's actually like a head of HR and their CEO are going to speak like with me, like right after I'm talking like bigger picture, and then they're going to get in the weeds and actually share their entire process. And I go, people actually love to hear that. One, it validates what they're either doing or not doing, right? But we tend to act like we're like, oh, it's secret sauce, don't share, this is competitive. And like, we're all basically doing the same stuff. It's just nice to hear how somebody else is doing it. So if you can ever find, people that are willing to share and talk about that, I listen to that stuff too, because I think it validates, kind of where we're at.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of call BS on it, because if you want to find any sort of quote best practice or how somebody's doing something, there's this thing called the internet where you can pretty much figure out exactly what everybody's doing. But if everybody had it all figured out, then everybody'd be doing it, right? So it's, it's about the application of the knowledge, not necessarily understanding. So.
It kind of makes me laugh when I talk to like an HR person that will go, oh, well, we're a best practice organization. I go, to me, what best practice means is you're doing something that somebody found innovative 5 years ago, and then they did it and it worked. And so now you're doing, so what you're doing is stuff that people did 5 years ago, and you're acting like it's like groundbreaking. Like, great. Now, again, if you're not at best practice, get to best practice, but we confuse best practice and innovation, right? Innovation is something new that you're testing. And I'm always like, hey, you should constantly be trying stuff and testing stuff in your organization, right? And if it works, great. If it didn't work, it was a test. We're gonna pull back, on that test,
Yep. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Best practice for me is kind of like a red flag, or at least maybe like an orange flag. It's kind of like, oh, okay. So you're like, so you're doing what you think is best, but you haven't necessarily figured out how to innovate or adapt it so that it works best for the organization, right? Like it's, and I don't get me wrong. There's some things we need to do that are established norms.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that it's the end all be all, right? So
I agree.
I think that's a whole nother podcast. We keep going on that. So we are at time. You've been very generous with your time, Tim. I know you're a super busy guy. But I guarantee you that all these listeners are going to be looking for other ways to learn more and listen and connect. So how can our listeners reach out, connect with you, and find out more information and what you're looking at?
Yeah, I've done a pretty good job branding. So Tim Sackett on the Google machine. You'll find me. I'm probably the first 100 pages. There used to be there. Well, I think he's still alive. There was another Tim Sackett in Minnesota that was a truck driver chaplain. And so when I first started like this whole journey of becoming this micro influencer, it was him and I fighting for SEO. And now I think I've totally killed him on the SEO.
Nice.
But it would be awesome if I was like the truck driver chaplain on the weekends and then recruiter guy during the week. But no, it's two different guys. But you can just Google, and then my site's timsackett.com. All of the social things, I'm Tim Sackett. So
perfect. And we'll have all those links in the show notes. So check it out. Tim, thank you so much for spending some time with us and imparting some knowledge and being so generous. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Love talking shop.
All right. That does it for the Rebel HR podcast. Big thank you to our guests. Follow us on Facebook at Rebel HR Podcast, Twitter at Rebel HR Guy, or see our website at rebelhumanresources.com. The views and opinions expressed by Rebel HR Podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any of the organizations that we represent. No animals were harmed during the filming of this podcast.
Baby.